Hello once again everyone, DM Pie Guy here, and this is going to be the second entry into my running modules for beginners guide. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how you're going to want to run or change your monsters a little bit just based on what they've given you in modules. Because sometimes the encounters they give you will work for an average party, but your party might not be average. And other times, I don't really know what Wizards is thinking whenever they publish modules. It will work for no group, but they still publish it anyways. So I'm going to show you how to hopefully avoid some of those frustrations that are very common, especially for people who are maybe not quite as familiar with some of the monster stat blocks. So I've got a couple up here. We're going to continue using Death House as one of the main examples I'm going to use here because it has several encounters that I think are pretty good or maybe need a little bit of tuning. So the first encounter that the players will come to is this animated armor here. He's at the top of the steps on the second floor, I believe. They'll find it and they'll probably want it because I always describe it as this nice plate armor that looks pristine. So you know any character with heavy armor proficiency is going to be like, give me that. And so then they get into a fight with this thing, unless they've read the module, in which case they're jerks. But this monster I think is pretty balanced for an encounter as is. It's a little bit easy for a party of 5. It's a little bit hard for a party of 3, I'd say, but it's not going to be anything too detrimental, even if you have fewer players. So the thing to look out for in this monster stat block is going to be its armor. So it is plate mail. It has 18 armor. That is pretty difficult for a level 1 PC to deal with, which your PCs are almost definitely going to be level 1 at this encounter. So if they have an attack bonus of 5, which would be 3 from their stats and then 2 from their proficiency bonus, they will need a 13 or better to hit this. And as we all know, sometimes, especially with a smaller group, the dice do not go your way. So the lower percentage chance to hit than something that is a more typical level 1 monster, it definitely can add up over time. Because this guy, he's got a pretty beefy attack bonus as well. He's going to be hitting on a +4. Oh, sorry, that's my plug-in here for D&D Beyond. So he does like a respectable amount of damage here. This is probably about half of a character's HP, roughly, in damage at level 1. So he's not going to really be able to one-round most characters, especially because they start with their maximum hit die. So only if he gets to your wizard is it really going to be too scary. And he only has 2 attacks per round. So it's possible if he rolls really well he could drop one of your players, but the rest should be able to deal with him pretty easily. So that's definitely an encounter that I'd say doesn't need too much tweaking. You can kind of just run it as is. The Specter right here, this is an encounter that I'd say is actually a little bit on the easy side. I don't change it at all because most of the encounters at the beginning of Death House are kind of just designed as a resource sink. So after the animated armor and this encounter, which is very close to the animated armor, they're probably going to want to take a short rest, which I think is a good natural spot for it. So I'll run this one also just exactly as is. So one of the things to note on this monster stat block, it has 22 HP, but it has resistance to all these types of damage. So any non-magical attack, it's going to resist half damage. Acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder, also half. So basically anything your players throw at it, going to be doing about half damage. So at 22 hit points, your average player attack's probably doing about 8 damage of hit points. That'll be halved to 4. So he survives for about 5-ish hits. That is not an incredibly long-lived encounter, but these fights should be pretty quick at level 1, honestly, because if it goes on for more than a couple rounds, you run the risk of dropping your players very quickly with this attack that does a ludicrous amount of damage to one person. So if you get that off on a bunch of people, then they're going to be in a pretty bad spot. And you don't want to put your players in such a terrible spot that they consider long resting in this dungeon, because even though like it might be alright to give them one, I feel like it just kind of disturbs the flow of the module. So hopefully the dice are not going completely in your favor, where the players are rolling nothing above 5 and you're rolling nothing below 15, and then those two encounters will be fine to run as is. Now, the next encounter that I think bears mentioning here is the Dark Lord Shrine. You have 5 shadows that come out if they touch the shrine or the crystal ball. So the thing of note in the shadow is that they're very low value for an encounter, but they have this attack that reduces a target's strength score by 1d4. So if you roll a 1, that means very little. But if you roll a 4, that's immediately getting very bad for players. If you're using this on a character that attacks with their strength, it gets into a snowballing effect where they're not going to be able to hit as easily, and they're also dying from losing their strength. Because if they get reduced to 0, they are dead. So these monsters are really, really wild. I would put no more than the number of players that you have in this encounter. So if you have 4 players, I'd take 1 out. Just make it 4 shadows. That will probably make it to where it works out fine. Also would consider, if your players have almost all dump strength, maybe make this a D2 instead. So like if you have people that are less than 10 strength, several of them, and they're getting hit by this, I would consider making this a D2 strength. But other than that, they die pretty easily. Only 12 armor class, so you're hitting them about 50% of the time, a little bit more. They have very little HP, but they have resistance once again. Another thing that you can do, and what I actually did in this encounter to speed it up a little bit, is I just ignored this damage resistance and then just had these surviving for about 2 hits apiece. So, they're really dangerous for only a couple rounds. And that is one way that I like to balance my encounters, is make it really deadly for both sides. So it is a little bit swingy, but I find those encounters to be really fun. And then the last Death House encounter, as we all know, we all love, we've heard stories about it on the internet. It's the Shambling Mound at level 2. You'll immediately take notice, he's a challenge rating 5. This encounter is not balanced. This is incredibly deadly. But I think it has its place because it's at the end of a module called Death House. And also, if you do kill your players in this, it's pretty easy to, alright guys, time to roll up new characters. Psych! Actually just take your character, but then give them an interesting flaw, so to say. Like my character who died to this guy, I made him come back as an undead. And he had all of the negatives and benefits of being undead. He was really, really happy about that. He loved playing that. So you can do something like that. If you TPK here, you can just give everyone something like that, like a Lingering Madness or something. Have them keep the same characters. Not a huge deal. But if I was going to try and balance this, so you see he has a really high armor class. Your players are going to be hitting less than half the time, mostly. An absolute whopper of an HP pool. And he has a multi-attack, so he has 2 attacks at +7, meaning that he's going to hit your average player more than half the time. And he does more than half their HP pool per hit. And then additionally, it has this additional effect if you are going to hit them twice with that attack. So all of that combined makes this just a very, very difficult monster to deal with, even at like level 3 or 4. I think at level 3 it would be possible. At level 2 it's almost straight out. Like I've seen groups do it, but it's just you need to do some weird mechanics stuff where it kind of abuses the 5e system really, where you have one person go down, then you bring them up with 1 HP several times. That's the best way to deal with this encounter, most players find. I don't like that so much, so I would probably make it a little bit easier. I would have the damage that this is doing, so just make him do 2d4s plus 4. That will make it to where your barbarian, he's going to survive 2 rounds instead of 1 round. Great encouragement. I'd also take this HP down to about 75, so then he dies 2 or 3 rounds faster. So if you did both of those things, I think that this would be an encounter that would put you at the edge of your seat if you were the players, because you're going to have one person who's getting wailed on, taking a lot of damage, probably even go unconscious, but you're going to be a decent way through its HP pool by the time that things start looking really bad. So now onto an encounter that I thought was too easy in Curse of Strahd. So this is the vampire spawn. As we all know, there is a vampire spawn that you fight pretty early on. Chandrain 5. The Shambling Mound is way more difficult than this vampire spawn, in my opinion, though. The Shambling Mound is a worthy single monster to put in a room. This one, I found that the players just kind of got around it and beat the crap out of it until its 82 regenerating hit points cease to exist. Especially if you have a cleric in your party that is going to help keep whoever this thing's focused on alive. This damage output is great, like if you can get the bite off consistently. But very likely the person that it's going to have access to is going to have a 16 to 18 armor class, so it's going to be hitting less than half the time. So I found this encounter to be just a little bit a little too easy for a group of 4 or 5. So what I would do to kind of change this up a little bit, I would take this regeneration out, to be completely honest. I don't like fights that last a long time, and what this kind of does is it makes the fight last 5 to 6 rounds, instead of if you just leave it with its 82 hit point pool. It would last probably about 4 rounds, essentially, is my gut feeling. A lot of this is just going to be feelings, and it's more of an art than a science, really. So I would give it a bonus action or something like a rogue, to where it can disengage and move, because it will get surrounded really easily, and once it's surrounded, it's kind of game over for this thing. It's just a matter of time. And you don't want your encounters to feel like that, because then you get into the slog territory, and this module, Curse of Strahd, is really not about slog very much. It's about interesting scenarios that you deal with, and then you deal with the repercussions of. So that's one way that you can spice up your monsters if you feel like their stats are kind of there, but their situation is not. Being a single monster is a difficult life to live. And then on the other hand here, we have Descent into Avernus's beginning encounter, which everyone universally hates. You have a bandit captain. Alright, those of you that are familiar know that this guy's a serious customer, and he's joined by his gang of 7 bandits. Anyone who has listened to any advice about encounter building know that 8 people versus your party of 4 is not a good way to start an encounter, because action economy is against your party. At level 1, particularly. So this encounter is very poor, because you have characters that are level 1, you have this guy, so even just this guy alone, I would say is enough to make an encounter pretty challenging, because he has 3 melee attacks in 1 turn, and he's going to be hitting at +5. So he's going to be hitting your frontline fighter probably about 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 times. So it'll probably take 2 rounds, and your first person that he decides to attack will be down. Just based on his damage output here. Because he'll need about 2 hits, and then they'll be done. That is not a position you want to be in, because you also are then going to have these guys who, they're normal enemies that you'd face at level 1. They're going to be hitting far less than half the time, and they do a reasonable amount of damage here at 4 HP, so you could survive 2 to 3 hits for any class at that damage level. But you gotta keep in mind that there's 7 of these guys. So what are they going to do? They're going to surround your fighter or your barbarian, whoever's in the front, and then a couple of them are going to have nothing to do, or they're going to move to the back. If they do nothing, your players immediately know that you're going easy on them, which is, I would say, okay, preferable to killing them, but it would be better in the first place to realize the error of the ways and take out about 4 of these guys to begin with, and so you only have him and 3 of his boys. So then it's a much more reasonable encounter. You can have 2 or 3 of your guys fight these dudes. They're going to take very little damage, probably about 2 hits before they die. So you'll have a couple of your party dealing with these guys, kill them off very quickly. Then you're going to have this guy here. He's going to be doing a decent amount of damage, maybe even will down the person that he's fighting. That's okay, because that person still has 3 rounds to live, because he's going to then turn to someone else. But by that point, your 3 other people should be freed up, and they should just go through that HP pool like nothing. It won't be easy, but I think that would be the right amount of difficulty, as opposed to, hey, you actually can't win this fight, and the way that the module's written, he will not negotiate, so you have to fight him if you don't give him exactly what he wants, and players don't like giving NPCs exactly what they want. So that's just a little piece of advice. I hope this was a little bit helpful looking at the various parts of a monster stat block that you might need to pay attention to. Let me know if there's anything else that I could go over that might be helpful for you that I didn't cover here. In the next video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I would put everything together, I think. So I'm just going to go through how I would ideally run the start of Descent into Avernus, because I have a few bones to pick with the module, but I think that it is close enough to where it's good. Alright, see you later, everyone.